Verse 11. When I considered all that I had accomplished and what I had labored to achieve, I found everything to be futile in a pursuit of the wind. There was nothing to be gained under the sun. Richest man in the world, wisest man in the world, someone who said, I have tried everything, done everything. My heart, whatever it desired, I gave it. I want you to stop and think for just a second about a moment, a time where you literally set common sense aside and said, I'm going to do this anyway. I had to laugh because we arrived last week. We finally laid my parents to rest and got the family together, went up to Churches Park, had a short service. But when we landed in Denver, my wife and I landed several hours later than my son, my youngest daughter, and her whole family. And when we met him at baggage claim, my granddaughter comes running up with this pink box. And if any of you have ever been to New Orleans, there's a place called Voodoo Donuts. And they opened up a place in the Denver airport. And the last time I flew through with the kids, we went up and got donuts. So they went and got Grandpa a donut. And these are not just donuts. This is all of your sugar, all of your carbs for the month in one donut. And when your granddaughter hands you a donut and says, eat it now, Grandpa. And at this point, by the way, I've had nothing to eat for 12 hours. I've been on a plane for 9 of those. And I flooded my system with carbs and sugar, which I knew was not a good thing, especially since I went from 0 to 5,000 feet and was headed up to 8,600 feet, where we were then going to go up to 12,000 feet. And this is one of those where the back of your head is saying, don't do it. But you look at your little granddaughter and you're like going, yes, Grandpa will be happy to eat that donut right now. And by the way, these are not small donuts. These are big donuts. But I want you to think about a time when you said, I know I shouldn't. And then you add those 3 letters, but. Solomon says, I did it all. Now, Solomon's saying, by the way, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because as I said last week, I really believe, because there's enough people on both sides of the camp, very historical, theological minds, amazing people on both sides that are trying to figure out whether the Book of Ecclesiastes is Solomon really saying, I never figured life out, or whether he's saying, I'm going to spare all of you the pain and the problems that I went through, and I'm going to actually jump to the end and tell you what you can do. Did he set out to prove you can't have God in the world, or did he give in to everything looking for the magic answer for life? Verse 12. I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the man be like who comes after the king? He will do what has already been done. If you have ever been the boss of an organization, the one who literally, when you get that phone call, could we talk to someone who has the authority in the following area? And they put the phone call into you. You get to decide how things shall be. But one of the things that you know is that when you leave, someone else is going to come in, and no matter how hard you try, no matter what you do, they are now going to get to decide how things shall be done. I retired in about 3.5 years, and it's interesting because one of the things that you have to do is you have to recognize that the new pastor is going to come in and do whatever he wants to do. And as a result, I've watched too many pastors who have gotten caught up in their old church and the new pastor doing things they didn't like or things, and next thing you know, they're caught up with members and they're in this, I can't believe he did that. Doesn't he know? And chances are, by the way, he doesn't know. So quick trip down memory lane. I showed up here 34 years ago. And on the altar was that green votive candle. Except it wasn't green, it was blue. And we were, at the time, in the season of Advent, so it made sense to me. Except then we hit Christmas and the blue votive candle stayed on the altar. And then we got to Epiphany, which is green, and the blue votive candle stayed on the altar. And then we went into Lent, which is purple, and the blue votive candle stayed on the altar. Now, because I was new not only to this church, but being a pastor, I finally started asking Elaine and a few of the others on the altar guild, why is there a blue votive candle on the altar? And this is the answer. Well, the previous pastor, Pastor Meyer, who is now with Jesus, his mom got critically ill. And his mom was Catholic. And so the blue votive candle was a prayer to Mary for us to remember his mom every time. And even though we don't pray to Mary, she wanted the blue candle because it went to Mary. And so they put the blue candle up there so that every time we saw it, we would remember to pray for Pastor Meyer's mother. So then I asked the honest question. Well, how's she doing? Oh, she died. So why is the blue votive candle still on the altar? Well, because Pastor Meyer said to leave it there to remember his mom. Okay, Pastor Meyer's been gone over a year now. And they just stared at me like, yes, so? Realizing I wasn't going to get anywhere, I said, can we at least get liturgically appropriate votive candles? So we can have green during Pentecost and Epiphany and purple during Lent and white and, or clear for, and they said, oh, that would be very nice. And so we swapped out the votive candles for liturgically correct ones. I knew that if I tried to fight these ladies, that even though Pastor Meyer's mom was long gone, I wasn't going to win. But to simply make a change, they were willing to make. When the king comes, he does whatever he pleases. When the king dies, the new king, in order to show that they are now in charge, often wipe out everything the old king did, change all the names, do everything. Why? Because they want everyone to know who's in charge. And so Solomon says, look, I may be the richest, the smartest, the wisest, the most influential king that's ever been. But the moment I die, everything changes, and I can't stop it. There's a letter in my desk, right-hand drawer, top, underneath the basket with all the pens and stuff. It says, in case of emergency. There's 2 letters in there. One is what to do if I die, and the second letter is my resignation letter. And the only thing I have to add is my signature and a date. And as long as that letter is in there, I know that I can take care of business the way that it needs to be taken care of, even if it means that I must resign my call in order to get what needs to be done. I've got friends in churches where the pastor needs to retire and he can't or won't, and there's nothing they can do about it, short of literally doing something that's going to split the church. I told the elders 25 years ago, if I ever become a problem to the church, you need to come meet with me and you need to say, sign the letter in your desk. And I need to be willing to do that. Because this is not my kingdom. This is Jesus' kingdom. This is his house. And if I become someone who is causing this place harm rather than good, I need to go away. Solomon says, I've tried everything. See, it's one thing to try everything. It's another to try everything and then analyze, why didn't it bring me pleasure? See, if all I'm doing is trying everything, waiting for that magic moment to go, aha, but Solomon didn't do that. Solomon tried everything and then sat back and said, why didn't it bring me the magic feeling of wholeness? See, to teach, one must be able to explain with more than just words. My 2-year-old grandchild has enough vocabulary to tell me when he is hungry, when he is tired, and sometimes we have to help them along. But you see, the moment that with Basil, the thumb goes in the mouth and the finger goes in the belly button, we're tired or we're overwhelmed. And then we help them verbalize. JL and Cana are 7 months, and as a result, they can't use words. So when Grandpa's got them and they are crying, chances are they have a full diaper, an empty stomach, they're overwhelmed, they're tired, or they just don't understand what's going on. And not being the mom, I don't have the attuned ear that says that cry is they're hungry, that cry is they're tired, that cry is whatever. But my daughter can immediately hear Kana or my other daughter, JL, and say, this is what needs to be done. This is where we're at in this. This is why it's so beautiful. Solomon says, I tried all this, and then I stood back and I said, why did it fail? And this is the part that causes us to believe that Solomon is not just bragging about him being the richest, most powerful, greatest, everything, but rather he is literally saying, I did this for your sake. Verse 13. And I realize that there is an advantage to wisdom over folly, like the advantage of light over darkness. Now notice the way he's saying this. There's an advantage of wisdom over folly. Now, I may have gone out and done a whole bunch of stupid things, but I knew that I was doing them. I knew why I was doing them, and I sat back and said, I'm not going to do that again. Versus the homeless person whose brain is literally like Swiss cheese, because that's what meth does to it, who only knows that they are hungry or they need a fix. Years ago, one of the homeless people in the neighborhood came by, asked if he could use the bathroom, and all of a sudden, when it got really quiet in there, I knew something was wrong. I opened up the bathroom, and he was trying to drink the isopropyl alcohol that we keep in the medicine kit. And Emmy, what happens when you drink isopropyl alcohol? Yeah, you end up in the ER. But you see, he went in, and when he said he wanted to use the bathroom, he had tried to grab all of the aspirin, all of anything that was medicine, and then he saw this bottle that said alcohol, and his brain doesn't register, and we had to say, no, out, Sean, out, and don't come back. See, there's a difference between the person who has enough wisdom to say that what I am doing is crazy, but I at least know why I'm doing it, and theoretically, I can stop when I need to, and the person who just knows that they're just going to keep feeding themselves or drinking or doing whatever because they no longer have any control over themselves. Going back to last week, if you knew that someone had a very strong rope tied around you and that you could trust them, would you be willing to take a step into the void in order to rescue someone who needed to be rescued? Verse 14, the wise man has eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I also knew that one fate comes to them both. Now, this is interesting. Notice what he's saying. It's better that I have wisdom over the fools who don't know anything. He says, I can at least, when I'm walking, I know what I'm doing. But both of us, whether wise or fool, the same fate comes to both of us. We're both going to die. And when we die, everything that we accomplished or didn't accomplish is wiped out as well. In the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. See, there is no one here on the earth with perfect eyesight. Nobody has a perfect soul. Nobody has a perfect life. No one knows absolutely everything. John 11, verse 9, Jesus says, if anyone walks during the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of the world. If anyone walks during the night, he does not stumble. He does stumble because the light is not in him. So Jesus says, followed up with, so all of us need to get our work done while the light is still shining. When I was a kid, daylight savings time, there was a period of a couple of weeks where we would go to school in the dark and come home in the dark. Then they would shift the clock and we at least went to school in the light. And then we would still come home because Colorado, 4 o'clock, it's dark. But during the summer, sun is up before 6, doesn't go down until 9 p.m. Just far enough north that it catches that. And it was interesting because during the summertime, we could go out and mom would say, you need to be home. And most moms would say, before the sun sets. My mom knew 9 o'clock was too late of a bedtime for little kids. But she would say, be home by, and then we would have to come up with an arbitrary time to be home. First trip to Alaska. We're up above the Arctic Circle by about 100 miles. Anybody know during the summertime when the sun sets in Alaska? Usually about August 12th. Okay? So we go up there and we got 24 hours of daylight. And first thing we have to tell the team is, yes, I know you don't think it's time to go to bed, but it's 2 a.m. and we need to be up by 8 or 9. I need you to go to sleep. And they go, but it's still light out. And we go, yes, and it still will be light out at 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Then I'd call my buddies up there who live up there permanently and during the winter, and Dan would say, hey, Mitch, you ought to come up. It's 54 below zero, and it's only 3 weeks till we see the sun again. And I'm like, oh, Dan, don't even go there. And he goes, yeah, I know. I'd rather come visit you in Hawaii. But this is the thing about light and darkness. We need darkness to sleep. We need light to get work done. Solomon says we need to accept the realities and figure out how to apply them to our life. Verse 15. So I said to myself, what happens to the fool will also happen to me. Why then have I been overly wise? And I said to myself that this is also futile. I mean, this is the point. Solomon got to the point and said, I am the greatest in the world. But wait a minute. The most foolish person in the world is going to share the same fate. The one who has absolutely nothing, the one who can't even think his way out of a paper bag, is no different than I am. Why have I been overly wise? What is the purpose of my wisdom? 1 Kings 3:5. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night, and God said, ask, what should I give you? Okay, David stepping down, Solomon is becoming the king, and God comes to Solomon and says, look, I will give you whatever you ask. You're about to become the king over my people. What is it that I can give you? Solomon replied, well, you have shown great and faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, righteousness, and integrity. You have continued this great and faithful love for him by giving him a son, me, to sit on his throne as it is today. Okay, so the first thing Solomon does is he butters God up a little bit. He says, look, I recognize that this is not an empty boast, God. You gave to my father everything he needed to be a wise and faithful king. You also gave him a son, me, who can sit on the throne. Oh, and by the way, you have to remember, Solomon has about a dozen other brothers from different mothers whose mothers and those sons all think they should be the king. And so God says, what do you need, Solomon? Lord my God, you have now made your servant king in my father David's place. Yet I am just a youth with no experience in leadership. Your servant is among your people you have chosen, a people too numerous to be numbered or counted. So give your servant an obedient heart to judge your people and to discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? All right, God, if you're going to ask me for something, I'm going to ask for the ability to discern. I need to know the difference between good and evil, so that when I govern your people, I can govern them well, because I'm young. I don't have any leadership experience. Remember, David had been a shepherd. Doesn't sound like leadership experience, except David has a staff and a bunch of sheep, and sometimes can be as much as 10 or 15 miles away from home, out in the middle of a valley where there is no one there except him. And he either protects the sheep or he doesn't. He either learns to protect himself or he doesn't. He either learns to take care of the sheep or they die. And if they die, he's not a shepherd. And so the leadership that he learned was about and because he was a shepherd. Now Solomon is saying, look, all I have ever been is the son of a rich and powerful king. Don't have a lot of leadership experience, so give me the wisdom to know the difference between good and evil. Now it pleased the Lord that Solomon had requested this. So God said to him, because you have requested this and did not ask for long life or riches for yourself or the death of your enemies, but you asked discernment for yourself to understand justice, I will therefore do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and understanding heart so that there has never been anyone like you before and never will be again. All right, you want the ability to discern? I'll give you the ability to discern. Now, we're going to ask the magic question. If you pray for patience in an honest prayer to God, how does God usually teach you patience? Do you magically just get this little nodule added to your brain and now you're the most patient person in the world? How does God, when you pray for patience and God decides to grant you your prayer, how does God give you patience? He tests you by giving you lots and lots of things to learn how to be patient. See, this is one of those things that we laugh at because, dear God, I want to be able to discern between good and evil. And God says, okay. And the problem is, most of the time, the way that we're going to learn is to walk in the darkness and the light and learn not to walk in the darkness. This is that old thing, when somebody says, give me a tip. And the answer is, okay, don't walk in dark alleys at night. And everybody says, well, that's not much of a tip. Well, no, that's a very important one. And if you didn't know it, it'll save your life. But this is where we start asking, how do you think Solomon learned the difference between good and evil, between darkness and light? And so God says, look, because you could have asked me for riches, long life, you could have asked for the death of your enemies, which, by the way, would have meant most of his brothers and half-brothers. So, but you didn't ask for that. You actually asked for a heart that would be able to govern my people. So, in addition, I'm going to give you what you did not ask for, both riches and honor, so that no man in any kingdom will be your equal during your entire life. If, and this is important, it's called a hina clause, the word but, if you walk in my ways and keep my statutes and commands, just as your father David did, I will give you a long life. So I'm going to give you riches. I'm going to give you power. I'm going to give you wisdom. If you follow me, I will also give you a long life. Then Solomon woke up and realized it had been a dream. He went to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. And then, this is interesting, he held a feast for what? All of his servants. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Instead of bringing his family in, instead of bringing in the rich and the powerful, Solomon hosts a feast for his servants. And the first thing you see is he does have wisdom. Because these are the people who are not only taking care of him, but the ones who he will count on to take care of the palace and all of the things that need to be done. And so he does what a wise king does. Instead of ruling with fear and power, he chooses to try something different. Verse 15. So I said to myself, what happens to the fool will also happen to me. Why then have I been overly wise? And I said to myself that this is also futile. So what's he saying? Verse 16. For just like the fool, there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man, since in the days to come, both will be forgotten. How is it that the wise man dies just like the fool? I love this question. See, think about what he's asking. And this is where we ask a lot of questions. Have any of you ever seen the footage after the wildfires, the earthquakes, the tornadoes, and the floods? If you look at the wildfire damage from Maui, there is an entire neighborhood burned to the ground, and then there's a house untouched. When we were there a few months ago, wildfire damage, and it ends right here where the Safeway is. Safeway was untouched. Shopping mall untouched. Yet right across the road was a multi-story apartment building that was completely consumed. If you've ever seen a tornado where the tornado damage comes through, and then all of a sudden this house is left untouched, the tornado jumps over it and wipes this out. Or an earthquake where an entire community and yet one or two homes or one building is left untouched. And we ask the question, why? And if you'll remember, after Maui wildfire, they came up with this thing that houses that had blue roofs or blue tarps were spared from the fire. Now, wouldn't it be nice if that were true and all we had to do is go to City Mill or Lowe's and buy a bunch of those blue tarps, cover our house, and then we know we would be fine? And the thing is, as much as we would like to explain it, we can't. There's things. And what Solomon's asking is, look, how is this possible that the homeless fool and I are going to share the same fate? All right, let me ask you something. We're going to start in order the easiest. Who is Nimitz Freeway named after? Admiral Nimitz, right? Chester Nimitz, right? All right, now here's a trick question. Who is Hale Street named after? House. Or somebody who's a James Michener fan, because who was the primary character in the book Hawaii? Abner Hale. So Hale is house. Hale is the fictional missionary in James Michener's book. And the question is it Hale or is it Hale Street? Who is Wofat? What? Chinese food, but also he was the bad guy in the original Hawaii Five-0. Remember? And for all of us who have been turning on Kinau Street for years, turns out we've been mispronouncing it. It's Kinau Street. Anybody know who Kinau Street was named after? The party girl princess, who finally got her life turned around and became a princess of means and wisdom. But she was a party girl. It does lead to Ala Moana, and I think there may have been reasoning in that. But when you read these things, like I said, this is exactly what Solomon is trying to tell us. Now, most of us, because we have a primarily military congregation, most people would know, oh, Nimitz is named after Chester Nimitz, blah, 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 blah. But when you're downtown, it's like Milt Fricke, the retired pastor on Maui. Every time somebody came around, he gave them this whole long instruction about how to pronounce things in Hawaii. And then he would say, all right, how do you pronounce Like Street? And of course, they would all say like. And he goes, no, it's Like. And they're like, ah. But all of this, we have to not only understand the culture, but some history. Why does the wise man die just like the fool? I mean, this is where when we hear about an individual who worked hard their whole life, took care of their body, never did any of the things that tends to shorten someone's life. They're out there helping people. They are benefactors. And they die at age 65. And then we read about Mick Jagger. And a bunch of those old 60 rock and rollers who literally tore their bodies to shreds when they were younger, and yet they're still alive and they're still on tour. And we look at that and we go, how is this possible? And that's what Solomon is asking. Why isn't there a guaranteed box that says, if you do this, you'll live to 60. If you do this, you'll live to be 70. If you do this, you'll live to be 80. If you do this, you'll live to be 90. Verse 17. Therefore I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me. For everything is futile in the pursuit of the wind. I mean, I had all those gardens. I had all those waterways. I had all those vineyards. I had all those animals. I had everything, and yet all it did was create more work for me. And I just couldn't find or figure out how for it to bring me joy, so that in some form or fashion, I was able to at least get up in the morning and want to go to work. And I'll tell you, the people that I hurt the most for are the ones who come into my office and say, I hate my job. It is everything that I can do to just get up and get to work. And I look for any excuse not to go to work. And my heart hurts for them, because My prayer for everyone is for them to find a job that they enjoy doing and that brings about good. This is that whole quote from Frederick Buechner who says, where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need. And when the two come together, you find yourself both needed but also being fulfilled. Solomon says, I just never found this. So what is the purpose of life? I mean, I guarantee you, I forget, there's probably almost 20 of us in the room. Every one of us will have a slightly different idea of what the purpose of life is. Is there a to-do list or a bucket list that everyone has to fulfill before they die? Because one of the things we often see is, there's somebody who says, hey, I checked this off my bucket list. And people look at it. Nancy and I were watching this TV show about the Russians open up this research station so that, and then they invite really rich tourists to show up, and they take them up to the North Pole. Some hike up there, some take the dog sleds, some they take up in a helicopter. And we were watching this, and they took this entire group of Japanese tourists up there. And remember, the North Pole is constantly shifting. It's not a single place on the ice pack. So they have to find where the North Pole is. And then literally they have everybody join hands, and they all walk in a circle around the North Pole, and they've circled the world. And they all spent, I forget, it was like $60,000 for this trip. And then there was this kid, 17 or 18 years old. He's the son of rich parents who were adventurers. He had already climbed to the top of Mount Everest. He had been to the South Pole, and so he decided that he wanted to parachute onto the North Pole. So the Russians took him up in a helicopter with two other guys who parachuted with him, former Spetsnaz guys, and he parachutes onto the North Pole, and then they interview him. And he says, it's the trifecta. I have now done the three greatest things on earth. And I just looked at it and I thought, those three are cool, but those I would not consider to be my personal three bucket list things. But what are your bucket list things? What are the things that you want to do? And more importantly, why do you want to do them? What is it that you think that by doing this or going there, what is it that you think it's going to do for you? And now, how do we rate the quality of someone's life? This is one of the big questions that, we have been asking ever since they came up with euthanasia. How does one measure the quality of someone's life? How do I determine whether someone's life is good enough for them to keep living? At what point does anyone have the right to say, I'm done? Solomon says, I hated life because no matter what I did, it did not fulfill me the way that I thought it would or that I hoped it would. See, there are two kinds of work, something that makes you happy and something that makes someone else happy. Now, here's the question, which is more satisfying? Okay? Something that makes you happy or something that makes someone else happy. And the assumption is, going back to that quote from Frederick Buechner, that what you are doing, it doesn't just make them happy, but it fulfills a need in someone else's life. See, this is one of those things. Yesterday, we flew in, got back, I needed iced tea. We pull into the McDonald's drive-thru, and this is when I pull up to the little, it's no longer, by the way, for those of you who are old enough, as old as me, Jack in the Box used to actually have a clown that took your order. But we pull up to just nameless kiosks that are big video screens now. And this is what I heard when I rolled the window down. So, excuse me? Well, I'd like 2 large iced teas, please. And I pull up, and the girl has her headset flipped behind her head, and she's talking in a very low voice. And when I pulled out my credit card, because I didn't have any cash, because I gave my last money to the shuttle bus driver at 3 a.m., I pull out my credit card, and she swings it out, and I put the thing in, and then it makes that chirping noise, and I take it out, and she just closes the window. Now, is this a person who's happy with her job? No. And it's interesting because even 40 years ago, when I was the manager of a pizza restaurant while I was going through seminary, I had people who would say, oh, there's customers in the dining room, we have to go to work. I had a completely different idea about this. Because, when there's nobody in the dining room, what do? Yeah. You watch the clock go very, very slowly. Because you can't shut down early. We were open until 11 p.m. during the week and 1 a.m. on weekends. And if I had something to do, it kept me busy. And then all of a sudden I look up and go, oh, good, only a half hour before we go home. But they were like, oh, and by the way, this is pre-cell phone. So there was nothing to do. See, today they're kind of like, oh, customer, I'm sorry, this customer is making me take care of him instead of continuing this very important conversation about what color of dress we think the dog should wear. See, if my job is something that I enjoy doing and it makes a difference in somebody's life, I get to go home at night, lay my head on a pillow and say, hopefully I did some good today and I feel good about it. But if my job is to take care of me and make me happy, and the world isn't going to give me $1 billion and let me do whatever I want, I'm automatically going to be unhappy. This is that Buechner quote. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. To be fulfilled, you need to do the work God gave you, the unique and unreproducible miracle that you are, and make an impact on someone's life. One or the other won't cut it. And his longer version of this quote is, if you happen to be the world's greatest brain surgeon, and yet they assign you to cut people's toenails that are ingrown, there's a very good chance that while you're doing good for that other person, you're going to feel unfulfilled. At the same time, if you get assigned somewhere where you personally get to be happy, but you're not doing anything for anybody else, it works the same way. Verse 18, I hated all my work that I labored at under the sun because I must leave it to the man who comes after me. Now we get to the truth. The reason I hate my work is because all of this great stuff that I created is going to be put into the hands of someone else, and they are not going to understand or treat it the way that it should be treated. And so the reason I hate all that I've done is because somebody else is going to come along and mess it up. And they're going to take the credit for it. And this is what I did. This is about me and my life. And this is where Solomon begins to understand, and he starts pushing things. Once upon a time, if you saw something called Johnson & Sons Moving, what did you understand just from the name? Who owned the company? Mr. Johnson. And who worked with him or for him? His sons, right? And so you name something, Johnson & Sons. And that was, I'm Mr. Johnson and these are my sons. So my son-in-law just accepted a call. He's moving into our district. And they went through the phone book. And whereas once upon a time, you looked for Allied or, Beacon's one of the big movers, okay? They found a moving company, and it's called Two Guys in a Truck. And when they had him come out, okay, the first thing the guy said was, look, all you get is me and him in that truck. And in other words, aptly named, okay? And they walked around and said, yeah, we can do this job. And Brendan was like, well, how long is it going to take? Well, it's going to take as long as two guys to take everything here and put it in that truck. And they gave him a bid. And I laughed at that because, you see, my dad, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a truck driver. My dad said that was okay because my dad, like I said, never graduated from high school, lied about his age, joined the Marines to get to the end of World War II. Immediately came back, delivered coal and ice, and then went to work in construction. And he did that till he was in his 70s. And his body just wouldn't let him crawl up on third-story ladders anymore. And so he decided that his son also didn't need to go to school. That as soon as I graduated from high school, or if I wanted to bail early on high school, I could just go to work with him. And it would be Gowen & Sons instead of just Gowen Construction Company. And the first year out of high school I did, because I was too young to go to truck driving school. I graduated when I was 17. And then I met Nancy, and we started dating. And I said, Dad, I'm going to go to school for a year at college. And he goes, why would anyone do that? Now, my dad was always proud of me, but he did not understand why I didn't want to follow in the family footsteps, because going back for generations, We were sharecroppers. We were in construction. The Gowen family was always hard labor. And he didn't understand how I could possibly be fulfilled, but he was proud that I was going to be a pastor, but he just was trying to figure that out, and he struggled with it. Because he was looking to hand off everything that he had made, Gowen Construction. He wanted to hand it off to his son so that the next generation would be Gowen Construction as well. And this is one of those where we struggle with how we see all that we are and all that we have. Who's going to get our bank accounts? Who's going to get our investments? Who's going to get our house? Who's going to get all these things that we have worked so hard for? And what are they going to do with them? Because the moment we die, no matter what they said, no matter what they promised, we have no idea whether they're going to follow up with that or not. Verse 19. Who knows whether he'll be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will take over all my work that I labored skillfully under the sun. And I realized that it's futile. I can't control this. The sudden realization that we cannot control things past the grave is something that often comes to various people. One of the reasons why Warren Buffett has always been a bit of a hero to me is he lives in a modest house, drives his own car, even though he's a multi-billionaire. And he was one of the first to say, my job is to give away all my money before I die. And he gathered this club together, guys like, Microsoft, and he pulled them all together and he says, guys, what good is it to have billions of dollars in the bank when you can be out doing good stuff? He says, take the money, And what these rich guys discovered was they'll announce, I just gave $3 billion to this organization for aid. And it's funny because then 6 months later, when they publish the billionaires list, whatever money they had, they now have more, even though they gave $3 billion away. They're actually having problems giving away all their money. Melinda Gates and a few of the others who went through divorces, they're doing a much better job of giving their money away. But what do you want to be remembered for? What is it that if you could right now write your epitaph on your tombstone and write the Wikipedia article that has your name on it, what would you have it say? What would you want your legacy to be? Because Wo-Fat, by the way, if you drive down to Chinatown, Wo-Fat's name is still on a building. And most people go, oh, that was the bad guy in Hawaii Five-0 if they're my age. They have no idea who Wo-Fat really was. Nimitz, if they don't know anything about World War II, they just know they're driving on Nimitz Street, like Dillingham and all the rest of these. How many of them were the original sugar barons on the island? How many of them were, who were they? What were they? Why was it all named after them? And why was it all named after them? And most people don't know anymore, and they don't care. Why do we think we need to be remembered? And what do you want as your legacy? Verse 20. So I began to give myself over to despair concerning all my life that I had labored at under the sun. Depression is a common symptom when what we are doing is not making a difference. One of the first things that when we're talking to people who are depressed, and there's a difference, by the way, PTSD and PTSS, when you have a trauma in your life, it is expected for the next couple of months you are not going to be yourself. And if you are acting the way you did before the trauma, you're usually hiding it and you're going to have a major meltdown. Where PTSD and PTSS come in is when after 2 or 3 months, the symptoms are no better than they were. You've not made any progress. Now we're starting to settle into something that is dangerous. And when we meet with people who are depressed and have been diagnosed such by people who know all that stuff, oftentimes what they will say is, I'm not happy with the way things are. I'm not able to make a difference. Everything I've tried has failed. These are all, when I say lies, I'm not trying to be mean. But their perception is very different from the people around them. And most of the time they've given up, they've crawled into a hole, covered themselves over, and what they really need to do is take a few steps back into the light. Not the bright light, but they need to get out of the darkness and into a place where it's like twilight. And they need to keep stepping in. And oftentimes we have to encourage and help them make those steps. Those are bold steps to get back into a place where they begin to feel like they're needed, wanted, and loved. And it's not easy. I mean, this is a tremendous step that goes through this. Because for them, we always assume that we just say, hey, I love you, you're valuable, you're wonderful, you're great. They don't hear those words. They don't get past the outer layer of the brain. But all of a sudden, when they're out doing something, and this is why we play with puppies, and I don't want anybody to get excited, but Nancy and I may have a new puppy to train for Hawaii Fido. We got offered a dog yesterday, and Nancy's got to determine whether she can do it. But it is absolutely amazing to watch some of these soldiers literally come out of the fog because all of a sudden they have to take care of the dog. Now, the dog's going to take care of them in a way that they don't understand. But when they're taking care of the dog, suddenly I have to feed the dog. I have to take the dog for a walk. Oh, wait a minute. If they have to take the dog for a walk and they consider this a labor, but they're outside. They're out interacting with people. They're out in the fresh air. They're out doing something. I have to clean up the dog's poop. I have to go to the store and get dog food. They may not get any food for themselves, but I have to go get food for the dog. And they take those steps out, and all the stories that I could tell you about the difference that these dogs made, especially back in the dark days of Iraq and Afghanistan, and these guys coming home, shells of themselves. This is what Solomon is looking for. He says, I'm about ready to give up because no matter what I've tried and no matter what I do, it hasn't made sense. When there is a man whose work was done with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and he must give his portion to a man who has not worked for it, this too is a futile, and it's a great wrong. We have this Puritan work ethic. If you work hard, then you deserve a lot. Why is it wrong for someone to inherit something that they didn't work for? This is what Solomon is asking. And more importantly, when that individual inherits this, what does it do for them? In other words, is it a good thing if I happen to be a man of great wealth? Is it a good thing for my kids or someone else to inherit it? Because that really is a question that needs to be pondered. You want to follow the lives of those who were given money and never learned responsibility? The news is full of them. And rarely, by the way, are they people who are actually out doing a good thing. Usually they're just out flaunting who they have become, but not because of anything on their own. They're famous for being famous and nothing else. We'll leave off there, and then next week we'll pick up with the next verse and jump in to chapter 2.